everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. Today, we're talking about expenditure analysis. And this might sound very technical, but it's really where you're gathering all the information about how much you spend. And that's a really important part of divorce because a lot of how we divide finances in England and Wales is based on needs. Therefore, how much you need to spend. So to talk about this topic, I've invited Alison Porter. And Alison founded Pennywise Consultants in 2010. And she provides a unique and impartial financial lifestyle analysis service. She started the business after being asked actually by a client to investigate a black hole in a high-profile divorce case where the client wanted to know how much money her husband had spent on extramarital activities. Alison's analysis helped the client win a substantial financial settlement. At the back of that, Alison decided to create Pennywise, specializing in creating and challenging detailed, accurate, evidence-based financial lifestyle analysis reports to support mediation and legal proceedings. Alison, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be on your podcast.
So this is a really interesting topic because I see a lot of people struggle with that. And as we're going to come to expenditure analysis as part of the financial disclosure process, if you choose to do a Form E. So could you just start, I guess, with the bigger picture of why it's important to conduct an expenditure analysis during divorce?
Well, in my opinion, the expenditure analysis is an area of divorce finances that is overlooked. Very simply, I think when people are deciding to get divorced, their main concern is what they're going to live on once they're divorced. Are they going to be able to manage? Are they going to be able to run their house, their car, their children, their pets? I think it's very frightening. And I think the legal process overlooks that. You mentioned Form E. Form E, for those that don't know, is a financial disclosure form. And if you go to a solicitor, both parties go to a solicitor, you will be required to fill in this form and put down everything about your finances. But the only bit we work with is, I think, the bit that is crucial, and that is how much you need to live on going forward. In Section 3, I think it is, they will ask you to put down your needs. What do you need to run your life? And that sounds like a small question, but it has a huge answer. And I would argue that it's the most important part of the Form E. And I was speaking at a seminar earlier this week, and I was talking to a very, very capable lawyer. And he said, oh, I hate doing the income needs schedules. That's what we call a future budget estimate. I hate doing the income needs schedules. I never know what to put down. So I just sort of guess. Well, he doesn't live the same life he's quite a young man. He doesn't live the same life as someone who might be in their 50s or 60s and have children and all the needs that go with that. And I would really like to, and it's what I'm trying to do at the moment, shine a light on the fact that income needs schedules are really, really important. And they're important for what your life is going to look like going forwards. I mean, I'm sure you have clients coming to you worrying about this. I mean, would you
it's one of the main
say
concerns.
that's a main concern when they come to you?
Absolutely. I mean, affordability, right? So many people stay in unhappy marriages because they think they can't afford to stay to maintain that lifestyle if they leave the person.
And I think that's true. I mean, I think now we're looking at people getting divorced in a cost of living crisis. Everything has exponential, I can never say that word, gone up.
Yeah.
And, an example is my dog's food. I have a large dog, a golden retriever. Everything's more expensive the larger the dog. And her food during lockdown and shortly afterwards was about a 12 kilogram sack was about £25. It's now 39. That is how much things have gone up. And we'll see that across the board. And not only have prices gone up, but there's something called shrinkflation. If you look at the packets now, The price might be pretty much the same as it was before, but there's less in the packet.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's getting down to the nitty-gritty, but that's what we do. We look at the price of everything. And I think it is most people's concern, whether they're the main concern, whether they're the one with the money or not. The one with the money might be concerned that he or she is going to give away too much, and not leave themselves with enough. And the one who's dependent on the other party will be worrying about whether they're going to receive enough. And it's just, yeah, it's a challenging thing for the lawyers. But I think if you've got any hope of your life looking the way you want it to look, you've got to get to grips with this very early on in the proceedings.
And it'll help with that fear that may or may not be founded actually around affordability. And I think what people don't realize is that it's also important as part of the legal process, because whether you negotiate your agreements and have them been sealed by the court, or whether you end up in court for those decisions to be made, the first criteria is going to be whether both spouses' needs are being met. And that's where we refer back to that information. And so having that clearly defined and well defined is going to make a massive difference. So it's really what seems like a task, but a very important thing to do and to do properly. Are there any typical mistakes that you see people make with regards to their expenses and how they document those?
I think the most common mistake is that most of us zoom in very quickly on our personal spending. What we spend on that's the easy stuff, really. What we spend on our hair, our nails, holidays. People are very focused on holidays, and they forget about what the lawyers call committed spending. Now, committed spending is what we call at Pennywise the boring spending, the spending
The new boiler, that kind of thing.
the new boiler, all the things you can't get away from, your electricity, gas, telephone, mobile. You have a choice over things like Netflix and Spotify, but you don't have a choice over things like council tax, water, all that kind of thing. So what we encourage clients to do, and when we do it with them, is we do those things first and then see what's left for the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So
which makes sense because you can't escape those expenses. So you
it does
start
make
with
sense.
those.
So on our checklist, I'm afraid the first section is that section. What are you going to spend on boiler repairs? What are you going to spend on your gas, electricity, telephone? And then we usually know how much money we've got to play with. And then we'll say, right, now we'll look at the fun stuff. I call it eating the big frog first. That's just, I always try and do the thing that I don't want to do first. And in fact, this whole process of doing your income needs schedule is really onerous. It's something that everyone gets stuck on, everybody. And therefore, I think it's just better to do the difficult things first.
And do you find that people tend to overestimate, underestimate? What is the typical mistake around that?
The most common trend is that people underestimate. The press love to talk about the greedy wives who put in these extortionate budgets. The reality actually is very different. Most people, and particularly women, are very reticent about looking greedy. They don't want to be in front of a judge or a solicitor and look greedy. So they'll usually pull back and underestimate their spending for that reason. Of course, you get ones that are they call it being over ambitious, I think. And in those cases, we quite often have to challenge and revise down those budgets for the client. But I would say, without exception, we all spend more than we think we do. We did an analysis on my spending, and I spent way more in a year than I thought I did. And that's the common trend. It's so easy to spend money without thinking about it. A latte here, that's £3.50, £4, depending where you are. It's you think, oh, well, I'll have the Netflix, I don't want to have the ads, so I'll have the premium subscription. All these bits add up,
Yeah.
and you can end up with spending an awful lot more in a year than you think you do.
And also, I've noticed people get very focused on daily expenses, and they forget about those ad hoc ones. Your boiler breaking, your dishwasher needing replacing, your car breaking down. And actually, if you're barely meeting the day-to-day expenses, then you don't have that extra pocket of money to dip into when you need to change cars or whatnot. And that's also something people often forget to include in their expenses. They think of the ones that are predictable when everything's going fine.
Well, funnily enough, that's something we focus on at
Mm.
Pennywise. In a perfect world, we'd all keep a rainy day fund. But the problem is that rainy day fund gets raided, or we think, oh God, I really love that pair of boots, so we buy them or whatever. But what we do at Pennywise when we're doing a budget for somebody is we do put in we have a frequency of replacement column. So we put in all the white goods, fixtures, fittings, house sort of redecoration. Houses need repainting outside, inside. So housing maintenance. So we put all those things in, and I would recommend that anyone listening to this thinks about those things. Your boiler is going to have to be serviced annually. Very often you do have to do it, or your contract with British Gas or whoever it is will be null and void. So there are things you have to do every year. So I would suggest making a list of all those boring things. I mean, the first thing I would say to people when they're doing this is have a notebook in your pocket or notes on your phone or something. And every time you think, oh gosh, I really ought to get the windows cleaned, or the car needs servicing, or I must pay my TV license or MOT, just jot it down. And in
Yeah,
fact, we do have, I know not everyone can see this, but we do have a leaflet with our 10 top tips on.
yeah.
And if
Cool.
you were able to put it's in PDF form, a link to that on,
I will. It'll be in
um,
the notes.
yeah, so it's just very simple 10 top tips, and it just tries to highlight the things that we can so easily forget in our day-to-day living. But you
Yeah,
do need to think, my washing machine might only live for 5 years, or it depends on the brand, but nothing lasts as long as it used to.
yeah,
And so we would say allow for your washing machine breaking down every 5 years. And if it costs £500, try and put £100 a year in your budget for that.
yeah.
Um, I'm going to be doing more reels about this actually on Instagram, on my Ask Penny Instagram thing, because I think if the more tips we can give people, the better.
Yeah.
Because not everyone can afford to have it done for them. Uh, but I would also suggest sitting down with a friend, um, and doing it piecemeal. Don't
Yeah.
think I've got to do the whole thing this evening.
It gets
We always
overwhelming
say
otherwise, doesn't it?
try and do a section a day or something.
Yeah. Yeah, the for me in general is quite overwhelming to people, but
It's
definitely the
hideous.
expenditure is a challenging one. And so for people who come to you, whether it's for their own budgeting and expenditure schedule, or because they want you to review what their spouse sent through, how do you assess whether it seems over budget, and then how do you reshape it to be more realistic?
Well, usually when we're asked to revise down a budget, it's because the lawyers and the client have asked us to do that.
Yeah,
So we know that it's likely to be too high. I mean, an example is we were asked once it was quite a high net worth case, and the wife wanted £11,000 a month. Well, he earned 10. So
oh,
this was just not
unlikely.
going to
Yeah,
work as a concept. So what we do then, there's really only one way to do that, is as part of your Form E disclosure, you have to give a 12 months of bank statements and credit cards. You have to provide the solicitor with those. And we'll be sent those, and then we go through them line by line. And we say,
Okay.
right, well, that's clothes, that's Waitrose shopping, that's Tesco shop, that's Netflix's, entertainment or whatever. And we will categorize everything. And we will look at what the spend was in that 12-month period.
So
And
from the
then
bank
we can go
statements.
back to the budget and say, well, you've put in £2,000 a year for clothes. That's ridiculous. You only spent 400 last year. So that's how we revise it down. We can't just look at a budget and say that looks too high, because in the context of the case, it might not be.
Yeah.
We had a woman, a husband once, who said, it's ridiculous how much my wife's put down for clothes. She only ever wears jeans. Well, when we looked at the spending, yes, she did wear jeans, but they were £250 a pair. So, it's all relative.
Yeah.
And we deal with cases from low, probably the middle class professional is our core base, but we look at spending at all levels, and it has to be reasonable. This is the word the lawyers will use a lot.
Yeah.
It has to be reasonable, and it has to be reasonable within the context of the case.
Yeah.
But the fact is, a lawyer told me this, who deals with a lot of the high net worth and ultra high net worth. He said, you have to be very, very well off before you can get divorced and both have the same lifestyle that you had before. Everyone's going to have to cut their coat to fit the cloth. And some people don't understand that, and some people do. But your life is going to look different, because once you're running two houses, it's, there's less to go around.
Yeah. And the expenses aren't split in two. All the bills, I mean, they would be a little bit lower if you're in a smaller house. But, depending on your child arrangements, if both parents have to have a house with enough space for the children, so they have, basically each of them a full-fledged accommodation, then they're really duplicating costs on half the income, or, there's only one person's income. So it gets a lot more complicated.
Well, that's right. And actually, some costs go up. So if your car insurance has been on your other half's policy,
Yeah.
you could be looking at taking out your own policy and having no claims bonus, no previous. So your car insurance might shoot up. The same with health insurance. We use a broker to get our prices, and we just ring them and say, what is this going to be? So when we are revising a budget down, or challenging it, as we call it, quite often we actually put the committed spending up, because we say we're about being fair and reasonable. So we're actually, he or she or they has put in too little for their health insurance, car insurance, whatever, but maybe they've gone too high on the personal. That's the trend.
Yeah.
So it is worth, when you're doing your budget, thinking about your insurance policies. One thing that goes down once you're on your own is council tax. A lot
Yes,
of
I
people
always
don't
tell
know
people
that.
to apply for that discount.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is a discount. And if you haven't done it, the council will backdate it to when you got separated.
Wow.
So that's a useful tip. In fact, that's one of the things in our 10 top tips leaflet.
I want to pick on something you were saying, because it's something I see a lot, where people will say, especially women will say, there will be this idea that certain expenses are frivolous. So, hairdressers, nails, shopping, etc. And they'll want to downplay. They're worried that if they say they spent £200 a month on their nails, it's going to be held against them. But actually, what you're explaining is that it isn't about an objective, measure of whether £200 is too much or not. It's based on their household finances and how proportionate that is to how much they earn, and based on past trends of how much they respect. So we want it to be realistic in that sense, but also in the context of their finances. I think that's a really good point. Could you elaborate a bit on that?
That's right. I mean, somebody might have their hair cut every 6 weeks, somebody else every 3 months, but we ask them that question.
Yeah,
And I would suggest to anyone listening that you don't put in things that you've never had before. Now, there's an exception to that, and that's if you've been economically abused. Economic abuse is really, really prevalent and in the world we work in. And wealth isn't a protector against it. It just camouflages it. And we've had clients who are living a lifestyle where you would expect them to have their nails done regularly, their hair done regularly, and they haven't been able to because they haven't been allowed to. So that's where we do depart from precedents. And we sit down with them and say, well, if you had been allowed to go and buy clothes, are you a Boden shopper? Are you an M&S shopper? Are you a Primark shopper? You know, whatever it is. And we will then put in an allowance for them. And the lawyers actually really welcome that and quite often welcome it on both sides. You know, you can't always work for the angel. And we've had huge success doing budgets for people who've been economically abused. It's
yeah,
horrible, and it's a way to keep people under control and stop them from leaving. And done properly, one of the joys of my job is we can give them back their freedom.
yeah, absolutely. And a lifestyle that is actually appropriate given their level
That's
of
right.
income. And so I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about is in the context of international divorce, because so many of my clients are expats and there are different expenses. What would you recommend people pay attention to, especially in terms of not forgetting to include it in their expenditures when they're doing their financial disclosure, if they're in that international context?
Well, of course, it depends which way they're going. We can help either way, whether they're leaving this country and going abroad or whether they're abroad and coming back to this country. One of the main things is I would think about flights actually as one of the main things, because if you are moving, we've got a client at the moment who's moving back to the Middle East, and we've said to her, well, we're going to have to allow for flights for your children, certainly, to come backwards and forwards. So, of course, you've got to decide which party's going to pay for the flights, but it's something to flag up. That's an
Yeah,
expense that's going to go up, particularly if they're maybe at school here and then
yeah,
flying back to the Middle East. So I think flights is important. Property expenses. So costs, if we've got a client at the moment moving from here back to Dubai, um, it's expensive to live out there.
yeah,
So I think the housing is very important. If you're using Pennywise, then you can send us some property particulars and we'll calculate the expenses from those. But I would think those are the main things. Depending on the country, things will be more expensive or they'll be cheaper. But I think when I was thinking about this question earlier, I thought flights is quite a big one.
yeah. Yeah, and I think coming back to what you were saying earlier about precedent, again, what might seem like a reasonable travel budget to a family who is English and lives in England and it has no ties to other places might be much lower to a family who, I don't know, is where one of the spouses is American, for example, and they want to fly back for Christmas and they might want to fly back in the summers, and that's a more expensive flight. And so that travel budget would be
Yeah.
higher. And to somebody else it might seem excessive, but actually in their context, it makes a lot of sense. So I think that's an important one.
I think that is really important. And these days with the internet, it's very easy to work out what that's going to be.
Yeah,
So, I mean, and that's how we do it. Google is our best friend. That's how we work out the cost of everything. But I think that's a very good point. And the other thing that goes up cruelly when you get divorced is quite often there's a single supplement to pay for a room.
yeah,
So you may have think in your head, well, our hotel room was £500 a week or something, but actually if you might have to add a single supplement onto that.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of detail we go into, but for a lot of cases it can be more broad brush than that. But holidays are something that they everybody wants a holiday and everyone should have one. They just might look a little bit different. But I think the thing is you just have to try and think about everything that you spend in a year. So think about the dental appointments, the car services, your dog's vaccinations, all these things. But as I said earlier, it's a big task. So I would keep a notebook and break it down into pieces, your house and those expenses, the car, the pet. I mean, we did a little competition actually. It was the seminar I spoke at on Tuesday, and we broke it down into just 8 main things. We had the car, children, who's paying the school fees, school uniform, school books, birthday parties, all these things are on our checklist. But actually, we have a very, very extensive checklist. But lawyers do have forms they give people as well. So I really would suggest that you start doing it as early as possible, because lawyers are always busy. They really, really are. And they're flitting from one case to another. And then they'll suddenly say to you, right, we're exchanging. That means handing over from one lawyer to the other, we're exchanging for me next week. And you think, well, I haven't done my income needs schedule. And they go, well, you've got to do it by next week. That's usually when we get a phone call. But I would really, I cannot stress enough how important it is to start thinking about this early. Really just start making notes, do it piecemeal, but get it done. Because if you're going for maintenance, that can be varied at different stages. But if, as a lot of people prefer to do now, you're going for a clean break, which means that's it. You sign a financial order, which is like a contract, and that's it. You can't go back for more. So it's really, really important to make sure that you've asked for enough, not given away too much, whatever.
And done it right overall, right?
But I would start early. I really would.
I always encourage people to start gathering that information from the very start, actually, ideally, even before they tell their spouse if they're the decision maker, because it might be that actually they're just not the one paying the bills. I worked with a client recently on who were building her budget for, she just had no idea how much she was spending because she was on her husband's credit card all that time. And she said that she has 2 children, and she was saying, "Oh, I think I spend about £60 a month on groceries." I said, "I don't think you spend £60 a month on groceries.
It'd be
That
more than
seems
that a week."
incredibly low." And so, just taking the time to look at bills, in this case, it was her bank statements, but she didn't know how much she was spending on electricity, how much she was spending on water, and just looking back at old bills, that takes time. You have to go looking through files. You may not have kept the bills. You need to log in. You don't remember your password for Thames Water or whatnot. So, all those things take time. And so if you can start gathering that ahead of time, it gives you a sense of control. And it gives you some visibility over things that you're going to need anyway later on. So it's a really good way of getting a head start and taking away some of that panic when you have to complete your 4B.
Well, as you mentioned very early on, it reduces the fear as well and the stress factor.
Yeah, I think that's the massive piece here.
If
There's a
you
big
know it's going
psychological
to
aspect
take,
to this.
if you know it's going to take £3,000 a month to run your life, and you say to your lawyer, that's what I need, and you get that, then you've got that certainty that you're going to be able to manage. Yes, and I think the lawyers don't paint. The lawyers don't, I think, put enough emphasis on the importance of the income needs schedule. But at the end of the day, you're so right. I mean, it's usually it's nearly always one party or the other that deals with the finances. And I mean, my mother, for example, she widowed last year. She hasn't got a clue, not a clue. My father dealt with all the boring stuff I've talked about, all the committed spending. I mean, she knows how much a pair of curtains is, but she doesn't know how much it is to bring electricity into the house. So people shouldn't feel embarrassed by that, because the wealth manager who was also talking at this seminar said the same thing. There's always one party that's more knowledgeable about the finances than the other. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. And in fact, doing this income needs schedule can be very empowering to the party that isn't used to it.
I
You think,
agree.
oh God, actually, I can do this. And
That's exactly right. It isn't as complex as I thought it was. And yes, maybe I was very
no,
happy not having to do it, but I can do it. So that's part
yeah,
of that fear we were talking.
yes. So I think it can be a really positive experience doing it. And when we work with clients, we make sure that they understand everything we've put down, and we can watch them growing in confidence as the process goes on. And then
Very
at the
gratifying.
end, I mean, there was a great story. I don't know whether it was one of these urban myths or something, but early on, a lawyer told me a great story about a client of his who'd put down £100 a month on her income needs schedule for dog treats. And the
Okay.
judge said, £100 a month for dog treats? Still, earth is that about? And she just looked him straight in the eye and said, he's a very big dog and he's very good. But the point of that is that she understood why that was on her schedule. The
Yeah,
danger of a lawyer doing it for you, which they do quite often, well, A, it's going to be very expensive, but B, they don't know anything about your life.
yeah, yeah.
And C, if you're cross-examined on it, you're not going to know why those figures are there. So we make sure that the lawyers and the client know exactly where those figures came from and why they're there.
Yeah, that's a
And
very
if you do
important
it
factor
yourself,
too.
happy days, because then you're going to be able to give accurate reasons as to why those figures are there. Well, I've put down £36 a month for dog food because I have a large dog and they're fed twice a day. You know why those
Yeah,
figures are there.
yeah, absolutely. Well, that's
Um,
all really, really helpful, Alison. Thank you so much, and such good, little golden nuggets of tips and information. For people who want to reach out to you because they feel they need support, how can they get in touch with you?
well, there's a contact page on our website, which is www.pennywiseconsultants.co.uk. And there's also an About Us page, which has all our contact details. There's a QR code. There's also what's called a V card, which you can download into Outlook. So our telephone numbers are there. We have a contact form on the website. You can find us on Instagram as well. And yeah, we'd be happy to hear from people.
Yeah, I
Um,
would definitely
so
encourage people to follow you on Instagram because you share a lot of very useful tips and tricks. So, if they're just dipping a first toe into this, it's a really good way of getting some information, getting to know you a bit, and then definitely reaching out to you to have a conversation, I guess, about where they stand and how you can potentially help.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I've started an Instagram account called Ask Penny.
Yeah.
Um, and the idea is I can't obviously answer every question. I'm not qualified to. I'm not a lawyer, but the idea is that I can signpost people on to someone who can. So if they need emotional help and practical, someone like you, Chloe, or um, we have a referral directory on our website as well called the Little Purple Book, and you'll find in there sections on divorce lawyers by region, financial advisors that we know and trust, mortgage advisors. You're going to need a team when you get divorced. Whatever the level of divorce, you're going to need your friends, your family. You're going to need knowledge is power. And I would always say to people, if they're thinking about getting divorced, look around, ask questions. How much is the mortgage going to be on that house? Have a look at your pensions. That's all stuff we don't do, but we know the people that do it. So
Yeah.
the referral directory has interactive cards. You're on there.
Yes.
So that you can go straight to the website or email that person straight away. But yes, it's a complicated, stressful business. So I would start gathering your team early
Yes.
on.
I agree. I think it really does take a team, and a lot of what I do as well is signposting and bringing in the right professionals at the right
Yeah.
time. So we're on the same page with that. Well, thank you so much, Alison. Such a great conversation, and I'm sure people will be
I
visiting your
loved
website
it.
for more information.
Thank you so much, Chloe. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I know we will continue to talk and help our clients get the best outcome that they can hope for.
That's exactly the objective. Thank you so much, Alison.
Thank you, Chloe. Bye.